Well, happy day 5. Yes, I'm coming to you from my office. So we are, oh, you might see the reflection of my computer in my glasses there. I'll just take them off. Um, but I think I'm going to title today, Who's in Charge? And I I read Genesis chapters 16 through 20 this morning. There's so much packed in there. We have Lot and his wife looking back and turning to a pillar of salt, Sodom being destroyed, Sodom and Gomorrah being destroyed. I'm not going to camp there because what was leaping off of the pages to me was the parallel stories of Abraham, Abram, and Sarai, and Ishmael being born, and with Hagar, them sort of taking control of that in their humanness, being a little bit impatient. As readers 2,000 years later and kind of knowing the Christian story, the Christianese story of like, oh, they were so impatient and they didn't trust. Y'all, it was like 25 years that they waited. Like he heard God's promise and then heard it repeated before it actually came into fruition. Like, wouldn't you be a little impatient too? And the probability of it happening, they were old. They were like, wait a minute, maybe he meant that it needs to happen this way. And so they went by their logic and their thoughts, like, we're really not doing that much later. But again, we're getting an Old Testament, one version of a story, the New Testament, a parallel version happening with the birth of John the Baptist. So first we have Ishmael and then Isaac, that is a parallel of John the Baptist and Jesus. And then, of course, their parents and how that came to be with Elizabeth and Zachariah, and then Joseph and Mary. And the parallels of it, like just when you go at a high level, the details are different. Some of the details are different, but they're parallel stories. It was just like mind bomb for me. Maybe this is not news to you, but here I am, a newbie reading the Bible for the first time, and really reading it and sitting with it and noticing, allowing time and meditating on it for some of these details to sort of float up to the surface and go, oh my gosh. And it's like inside out versions of the story. So we have both are impossible births or very unlikely. We literally have the miracle or the virgin birth of Jesus and the pregnancy. But we go back to Genesis, and Sarai is 90 years old when she has Isaac. Like, she laughed. God was like, did you just laugh? Like, so who's in charge? That is the parallel that I'm drawing between the two, or the message that I'm kind of getting. Even though Abraham, or Abram, who also gets renamed Abraham by God in this, which means going from exalted father to father of nations. Sarai gets renamed to Sarah, which means mother of nations. It's people living on their own terms. Like, they're in charge. Yes, they're worshiping God, and Abram is building altars and consulting him. But really, you get the feeling that Abraham's pretty much in charge, and he's just kind of consulting and letting God know what he wants, and he's listening and believing the promises. But Abraham is very much a man. I think I almost titled yesterday, Charting Your Own Course, because that is just the sense that I'm getting from this. And that's sort of the Old Testament message in general, like the old way. Yes, we're going to consult God and we need the rules and that, but we're pretty much going to be living our own lives and in charge of our own, like self-sufficiency is the rule of the day. But another interesting parallel, just to push the pause button on myself for a minute and go, is even the message being delivered about the coming birth of Isaac in particular and Jesus. It's very much like the three wise men. We get an image of Isaac being visited by three men. We know one of them is the Lord, and then there are two angels. And then, of course, we have the three wise men, the parallel of even that story of the three wise men at Jesus's birth, right? Or coming afterwards. So there's a lot of parallels here. So Sarah has a child at 90, and she kind of laughs. She's like, "Oh, that is so." It's not impossible though in the Old Testament. Like this, like it's hard to believe, but it's not impossible. In the New Way, we've got without God being in charge, this is impossible. You've got fully surrendered people versus people that are like, yes, they're very much worshiping God and they believe in God, but they're not living what appears to me anyway, a fully surrendered life in the way that we get the picture of in the New Testament. And really God being in charge. And even the names of the meaning of the names that we have is really interesting when you just do a parallel study. We have Abraham, father of nations, Sarah, mother of nations, Hagar, flight or to be dragged off, Ishmael, God hears, and Isaac, God laughs. So who has the last laugh? God does, because Sarah laughs and God calls her out on it, and then Abraham names his son Isaac, which means laughter, or God laughs. And then Joseph means increaser or repeater or doubler, or may he be added to. That's sort of the sense of that name. Mary, we know it in the Hebrew as bitter or strong, but she might have actually been known as Miriam, Egyptian, which means beloved. So just little tidbits for you to know. Elizabeth, God is an oath. Zachariah, Yah, or God remembers. And John, God is gracious. Jesus, God saves. So God being in charge, and even the meaning of the names versus kind of man being top dog and in charge. God's kind of along for the ride. We appreciate God over here in the Old Testament, and we understand that there is a God and he's in charge, and we need him to sort of be like a governor. But he's not really in charge, like man's in charge in the Old Testament. So who's in charge? And of course, we get the new message where things that happen, especially in these two parallel stories, is a miracle. It can't happen without God. Whereas we can kind of explain it more. And even they took matters into their own hands by Abram sleeping with the servant Hagar. But there was still, God visited Hagar and said, you're going to be pregnant, and God names Ishmael. And here's another really interesting parallel, and then I'll wrap it up. But Ishmael, God tells Hagar that Ishmael is going to be a wild, untamed man, like a donkey, against his relatives. And we get the premonition, parallel but different, of John the Baptist kind of being wild, that he's going to be out in the wilderness, and that he'll stay away from alcohol, like some of the premonitions and things that are going to be coming with John the Baptist. So really interesting to pay attention as you read this amazing book and look at the patterns and the parallels, and how when man lives this way, being in charge, but sort of, you know, consulting God, and God, we need God for rules and all of that. Well, that's what we understand with the Old Testament, versus a surrendered life where God's in charge, and the miracles that can happen, and the things that are truly, we get the repeated message in the New Testament. With man, it is impossible, but with God, all things are possible. So, it got me thinking, like, am I living a surrendered life? I'm thinking about it, and I try to practice it sometimes, but I've got a long way to go. Um, Good thing that God loves us regardless, and that He is patient, and that He has given us a promise. I'm trying to read some of the meanings of the names here. And He hears, and He smiles down at us. Yes, and He is gracious, and He saves. So when we learn to live submitted and surrendered, realizing that, in trying to live in the right order of things, and realizing that we're a part of God, God is in us, we're not separate. And that's the other thing that's a big difference between the Old and the New Testament. They were separate from God, or at least they thought they were. And so they lived their lives kind of accordingly. New way of thinking realizes that we are not separate. God is in us, we are in Him, we are therefore kind of in each other, and we are all part of the one. That's a beautiful message. So, really interesting parallels. So, pay attention as you read this practical book, and I hope that you remember who's in charge. All right, bye.